Hey there, welcome to Unit 2, Lesson 10. We are finally getting close to the end of this unit. It's a very long unit. Last week, you learned about the Articles of Confederation for your last unit and about why they were such a failure and did not work out very well for us. And so that leads us to the Constitutional Convention, which is where we're going to get rid of the Articles and we're replacing them with the new U.S. Constitution that we still use today. So you have some things to be completing today, but really it's mostly just the notes. So we're going to go through the notes. As you're going through the notes, you're going to fill in your appropriate interactive notebook page. Remember, this is a quiz grade. It is due the day of your test, which is 2 days from now. And then if you have any other missing work, there's a lot of people who did not turn in the assignment from the ACT days last week. So make sure you get that and any other missing assignments turned in and completed. This is the interactive notebook page that you want to go and find today in your notebook. So constitutional compromises, and we're going to go through and talk about the Great Compromise, the Three-Fifths Compromise, the Electoral Compromise, and the Bill of Rights. And you're going to put that information into your notebook. Before I give you that information, though, I want to give you a little bit of like just background information, a little bit to know about the Constitutional Convention. There were some major players there that you're familiar with. George Washington was there. He was the one who kind of presided over the meetings and led them. Hamilton was there. James Madison was there. Madison's given the nickname as the father of the Constitution because he does so much writing of the Constitution itself. But there were some other people that are notable that weren't there. So both Adams, John Adams wasn't there because he was over in England being a ambassador for the United States over in England and representing the US there. His cousin, Sam Adams, wasn't there because nobody wanted to invite him because he was a little bit loud and boisterous and people didn't want to deal with him. Jefferson wasn't there because he was over in France being the ambassador to France during the time period. Patrick Henry wasn't there because he said he smelled a rat. He was like, I don't want to go be a part of this. I'm not trusting what's about to happen and go down. And then the state of Rhode Island did not send anybody to participate either. So originally, this was just referred to as the Philadelphia Convention because they didn't know they were going to be writing a whole new constitution. They just thought they were going to meet and then talk about some changes that should be made to the Articles of Confederation. So they just referred to it as the Philadelphia Convention because it happened in Philadelphia. The meeting was held during the hot summer months of 1787, and it was held in secrecy because you got to understand there's a whole bunch of these like people that we consider to be our founding fathers, but nobody really gave them the permission to really go and do this. Like the masses of people weren't supporting this. And remember, we created a democracy now. So they were like, we're not going to tell anybody that we're coming and making these changes. Let's just make the changes and then we'll tell everybody about them after. Once they completed the Constitution, they then had to send it out to the states to be ratified. And 9 states out of the 13 at the time would have to ratify it or approve it in order for it to become effective. So when they get there and they start talking to each other about the issues and the things that need to change, there's a lot of arguing, a ton of arguing back and forth and back and forth. And so this creates, when the arguments occur, in order to get everybody happy, it creates a series of compromises that take place. Some of these should be familiar to you. You should have learned about these in your civics class, for example. So this should be some basic review, but let's talk about what each side wants. The first one that we're going to talk about is the Great Compromise, or what is also referred to as the Connecticut Compromise. So we're going to talk about what each side wants, what each side gains, and then the lasting impact on our government. So for each side, this is going to be a large state versus small state kind of situation that we are focusing on. Large meaning large in numbers, large with population. So the large states are supporting what we call the Virginia Plan because Virginia is a big state. They wanted representation in the government to be based on population. So let me step back. If you remember from civics, we have this legislative body called Congress. Congress is going to be responsible for making the laws. They want the state of Virginia and other large states want to determine how many people get to be in Congress for each state based on the number of people living in that state. So that therefore, the people in a small state like Connecticut, for example, won't have as much power as the people for a large state. They're like, look, we've got more people to represent, so therefore we should have more people representing us. On the other side, you have the small states, and the small states are saying, well, that's not fair if we do that, because if it's based on population, then that means the big states are always going to have more power and it's not going to be evened out. And so they are upset about it. So they support the New Jersey plan, because New Jersey is a small state, where they say every state should have equal representation. Every state should have one person that represents it, and that is it. It should not be based on population. So they argue back and forth about this. And then in the end, what they each get is a little bit of something to make them happy. We have the creation of the House of Representatives. It will be considered to be the lower house in Congress, meaning it doesn't have as much power as the other house, but its number of delegates will be based on state population. So that makes those large states happy. These small states are happy because they get the Senate, and the Senate will be considered to be the upper house. And instead of it being one person from each state, it will be two people for each of the different states. So when the Senate originally started, it started with 26 people. Obviously, today with 50 states, we have 100 people in the Senate. And these two houses are the same two houses and the same structure that we use for our Congress today. We still have this bicameral legislature that consists of two houses that both have to play a role in making the laws. So that's the Great Compromise. Let's go to the next one. The next one is the 3/5 compromise. So this one gets a little bit tricky now. There is nothing in the Constitution, or nowhere in the Constitution, that the word slavery is ever used. The founding fathers kind of knew to be a little bit ashamed of this practice that they did. And so they never used the word slave at any point. But the question came up of, okay, if we're going to have a House of Representatives that is based on population, do slaves get to count towards the population? So your southern states, who were very fearful of the fact that the northern states would take away slavery and would eventually get rid of it and would have too much power over them, says, listen, we need to count our slaves. They are people that have to be taken care of. But the northern states are like, so now you want to count them as people, but you didn't really think of them as people before. You call them property, but now you want them to be people, and now you want to count them. So there was a lot of back and forth about whether or not slaves should just count towards the population. That's a big deal here. So many times I have students being like, oh, we're talking about if they're citizens. No, we're not. We're talking about if they're allowed to vote. No, we're not. That was most certainly not happening. We're just talking about, do they get to be counted as a person in the state? So the North, as I said, doesn't want the slaves to count towards the population. They had no rights. They weren't able to vote. They weren't being treated as people. So therefore, why would they count? The South, as I said, on the other hand, says that because of the overabundance of slaves in the South, they really want the slaves to count as the population so that they could have more representatives in the House of Representatives. In the end, we come up with the 3/5 compromise, which says that not all slaves would count towards the population. So 3 out of every 5 slaves would count. So essentially what that means is 60% of the slave population would be counted towards a state's population totals. Again, they're not voting, they're not citizens, but 60% of them just count as people. So we know how many people are in the state whenever it comes time to say this many people go to Congress for the state of Virginia, for example. And the South out of it gets the fact that some of those slaves get to be counted. So again, it's compromise. It's not all of them, but some of them do get to be counted. This doesn't really have a lasting effect on our government today because of the fact that slavery is obviously now illegal. So that's not a big component. I would say the only real lasting effect is that this 3/5 compromise was also created as a part of the electoral compromise, which we'll talk about here in just a minute, which is going to help us determine how to elect the president And the southern states wanted to have more electors, wanted to have more of a say in who would be the president. And so that's kind of the lasting impact, but really that goes towards the electoral compromise, which is going to be the next one we talk about anyway. So again, for the electoral compromise, this time we're going to see an argument between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. And we're going to learn more about these guys tomorrow. But the Federalists are saying that they wanted Congress to be able to elect the president. These guys want a stronger national government. As I said, we'll talk more about them tomorrow. But they want Congress, they don't trust the people. They don't think that the people are smart enough and educated enough to make the right decisions about who should be president of the United States. The Anti-Federalists, on the other hand, were the ones who were a little bit more on the weaker government side. Like they still like the idea of the states having powers. They are very weary of giving the power of choosing a president to a group of people, even if that group of people are elected. They're like, no, we wanted to create a democracy. And in a democracy, the people should have a voice and they should be the ones choosing who the president is. So in the end, both sides gets a little bit of what they want with the creation of the Electoral College. So the Federalists get the fact that the people are not going to directly elect the president. Instead, there's going to be these middlemen, these intermediaries, which are appointed by the state to officially cast the vote for president. The electors, or those intermediaries, as I said, are then supposed to cast the vote, however, based on the popular vote. And I say supposed to because today we hold them to it. Back then, they actually had a little bit of leeway, but if their state voted for Thomas Jefferson, then the Electoral College would vote for Thomas Jefferson. The lasting impact on this is that we still use it today. The Electoral College system is still a very highly controversial topic. It is possible that you can have somebody elected who gets more popular votes, has more votes from the people of the country, but because of the Electoral College system, they don't actually win the presidency because it's all about winning the state's electoral votes, not about the popular vote. So, for example, that happened back in 2016. Donald Trump had 3 million less votes nationwide than Hillary Clinton did, but he won the states that he needed to be able to win. Same thing happened with Al Gore and George Bush in 2000. Al Gore had more votes from the people. George Bush got more electoral votes. So it's not a perfect system for sure. So it's very highly debated. Some people think that it should go away. I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. There would need to be something else to push a dramatic push to make it happen. All right, the last compromise we got to talk about is one that is super important, and that is the Bill of Rights compromise. So as we are writing out the Constitution, there are some people who are like, what about freedom of speech? Do we have that? What about freedom of religion? Do we still have that? And people are saying, you're not putting this in the Constitution, and it's not in writing. So how do I know I'm going to have it? So again, you end up having two sides, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists say that they believe their people's rights were already protected by the states and just by common sense, that we don't need to put that you have freedom of speech because your state is already giving you freedom of speech, and that therefore we know that you're going to have that. The Anti-Federalists, though, are like, no, you're creating a much larger, stronger government under this new Constitution. So we want to make sure this stronger government doesn't have the ability to overpower and take our rights away. We just got done fighting a king to get these rights. I'm not going to have them taken away now. So they believe that they needed to have those basic rights listed specifically in the Constitution. The Federalists win a little bit of this because the Bill of Rights is not actually in the main body of the Constitution. The Constitution does get passed without these rights being listed in it. However, the Anti-Federalists essentially say, listen, we aren't going to approve this unless you promise us that you will add it. So the first 10 amendments, because remember, an amendment is when we add something to the Constitution. The first 10 amendments are those Bill of Rights, and they're going to list out the different rights that are given to you. And later this week, we're going to review what those are. The lasting impact on our government is that we still have the Bill of Rights today. You are still protected by them. And every citizen in the United States is guaranteed to be protected by those rights. So that brings us to the end of the notes. Next, we're going to be talking about the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Once the Constitution is written, now we've got to get everybody to be on board with it. So that's going to be our next topic that you're going to learn about tomorrow. I'm going to back out of here and come back over to Unit 2, Lesson 10, which is where we're at today. What you need to do now is that I don't have another task. There were so many people that did not complete your assignment from last week that I'm giving you another day to do it instead of adding another assignment in front of you right now. So make sure that you use the rest of the class period or any time right now to work on any missing work that you might have, get that stuff turned in, because your test again is in 2 days. With that being said, I'm gonna let you go. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, let me know. You know how to get in touch with me, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye, y'all.